Well, thank you very much, Dan. And Mr. Chancellor, Mr. President, faculty and staff, friends and family, and most especially the members of the graduating class of 2014. Thank you very much for the honor of being with you on this extraordinary day. And let me tell you a story that begins on a ridge in Borneo. Close to dusk, the forest alive with the electrifying roar of black cicadas, thunder over the valley. I was sitting by a fire with an old friend of mine, Asik Nielik, the headman of the Ubang River Penang, the last nomadic people of Southeast Asia. And the clouds passed and the light of a moon filtered through the canopy of the forest, and Asik looked to the moon, and he looked to me, and he asked, "Is it really true your people have been there? Is it really true that they brought back nothing but rock and dust? How did you get there? What kind of transport did you have?" Well, it was difficult to explain to a man who kindled fire with flint a space program that had catapulted 12 individuals at the cost of trillions of dollars across space, or the fact that they did come back with nothing but rock and dust, 828 pounds of it altogether. But of course, Asik's question prompted the timeless answer. The true purpose of those space journeys was not wealth secured, but rather vision realized, a shift in perspective that would change our lives forever. And of course, the seminal moment came on Christmas Eve of 1968 when Apollo went around the dark side of the moon, only to emerge to see for the first time in human history, not a sunrise or a moonrise, but an earthrise. And in that single moment, we realized that the Earth was a fragile planet, a single interactive sphere of life itself. And that image sparked a paradigm shift that will be spoken about 1,000 years hence. Almost immediately, we began to think in new ways. Just think about 40 years ago, just getting people to stop throwing garbage out of a car window was an environmental victory. Nobody spoke about the biosphere. Now that term is part of the vocabulary of school children. And this wave of illumination, this great wave of hope, spread everywhere. Think about it. In little more than a generation, women went from the kitchen to the boardroom, people of color from the woodshed to the White House, gay people from the closet to the altar. What's not to love about a country, a world capable of such incredible cultural capacity for change and renewal? But let me share one other journey of discovery, also brought to us from the brilliance of science. It's really the moonshot of your generation. It too will be remembered for 1,000 years. Nothing that has happened within the last century has done more to liberate humanity from the parochial tyrannies that have haunted us since the birth of memory. This too was a long voyage of discovery, but a journey into the very fiber of our beings. Because over the last 2 decades, geneticists have finally proven it to be true, something that philosophers hope to be true. And that is a fact that we're all brothers and sisters. And I don't mean that in the spirit of hippie ethnography. I mean quite literally, studies of the human genome have left no doubt whatsoever that the genetic endowment of humanity is a continuum. Race is an utter fiction. We're all descended from a handful of people who walked out of Africa some 65,000 years ago and then embarked on this extraordinary hijra, a journey 2,500 generations in creation, a journey that would carry us to every single corner of the habitable world. But here's the amazing idea. If you accept that we're all cut from the same genetic cloth, it means every human culture shares the same raw genius, the same mental acuity, and whether this intellectual potential is invested in technological wizardry, or by contrast, placed in the challenge of unraveling the complex threads of memory inherent in a myth, is simply a matter of choice and cultural priorities. There is no hierarchy in the realm of culture. That old Victorian idea that there was a ladder to success that went from the savage to the barbarian to the civilized of the Strand of London has been absolutely demystified by modern science and shown to be an artifact of the 19th century, as relevant to our lives today as the notion that clergymen had then that the earth was only 6,000 years old. The other peoples of the world, the other cultures of the world are not failed attempts at being us. They're not failed attempts at being modern. Each is a unique expression of the human dream. Each is an answer to a fundamental question. What does it mean to be human and alive? And when the myriad of cultures of the world answer that question, they do so in 7,000 different languages, 7,000 unique voices that comprise our repertoire for all of the challenges that will face us as a species in the ensuing millennia. So what this means for you is very simple. There are tens of thousands of teachers out there that you didn't even know about. You can sail with Polynesian wayfinders, navigators who can sense the presence of distant atolls beyond the visible horizon simply by watching the reverberation of waves across the hull of their vessel. In Japan, you can follow the Tendai monks who, as part of their initiation, run 17 hours at a stretch every day for 7 years, wearing out 5 pairs of sandals a day. Or you can join a caravan of blue-robed Tuareg in the Syrian sands of the Sahara, hunt narwhal with the Inuit in the light of the midnight sun, sit by the side of a bodhisattva in a Tibetan cave, a shaman in the forest of the Amazon. Or you can pursue completely different avenues of adventure and discovery in science, the arts, social justice, engineering, medicine, the military, the clergy. No generation has ever had so many options or shown such promise. Now, all of these grandiose sentiments aside, I'm sure some of you are thinking, what has my degree prepared me to do? Well, let me tell you a story about my friend Steve. Steve graduated from a liberal arts college and had no idea what to do with his life, so he went off to India and he lived in a cave for 4 years. He knew he was in trouble when the local people started to bring him food, so he came back to America and had to decide what he was going to do. So, of course, he meditated for 65 days. Now, when I asked the obvious, like, what did you find out? The person who was telling me the story, who was driving me to an airport, turned to me in a conspiratorial whisper and he said 2 words, vegetable protein, as if that would explain everything. But what Steve had figured out was that the problem with soy milk was not the product, but the container that relegated the product to the weird food section of the grocery store. So Steve took soy and milk, put it together and made silk, packaged it in milk cartons, and insisted that it be placed in the dairy section of the grocery store, even though it doesn't have to be refrigerated. And 5 years later, Steve sold his company for $295 million. Now, what Steve discovered is a universal lesson. Life is neither linear nor predictable. A career is not something that you put on like a coat. It's something that grows around you organically, step by step, choice by choice, experience by experience. No work is beneath you. Nothing is a waste of time unless you make it so. An elderly cab driver in New York may have as much to teach you as a madman in the Sahara, or a wandering sadhu in India, or indeed a university professor at Trent. If you place yourself in the way of opportunities, and this is really how life works, in situations where there is no choice but to move forward, no option but success, you create a momentum that in the end propels you to new levels of experience and engagement that would have been beyond your imaginings a few short months before. Creativity is a consequence of action, not its motivation. Do what needs to be done and then ask whether it was possible or permissible. Pessimism is an indulgence. Orthodoxy, the enemy of invention. Despair, an insult to the imagination. Nature loves courage. A good friend of mine, Jim Whittaker, who was the first American to reach the summit of Mount Everest, once told me that if you don't live on the edge, you're taking up too much space. Dream the impossible, and here's the other amazing thing, and the world will not let you down. It will lift you up. This is a great surprise, the message of all the mystics and saints. You hurl yourself into the abyss, only to discover that you land on a feather bed. Now, many of you are understandably concerned about finding jobs, but be careful. The word job is derived from the 16th century French word gobert, meaning to devour. My father had a job all of his life. He called it the grind. As a little boy, I thought he came back from the bank every day just a little bit shorter. Well, fortunately, I've never had a job, at least not in that sense. Actually, I've never had a job at all. And I don't imagine that many of you coming from a fine university like Trent will find a single slot into which you might plug your entire existence. But what you will do is work, and hopefully as ferociously hard as I have all of my life. And the word work has a better ring to it. It's derived from the term in Old English, meaning action and deed. And you'll find that the work that you do is just a lens through which to view and experience the world, and only for a time. The goal is to make living itself, the act of being alive, one's vocation, knowing full well that nothing ultimately can be planned or anticipated, no blueprint found to predict the outcome of something as complex as a human life. But if one can remain open to the potential of the new, the promise of the unimagined, then magic happens and a life takes form. And that, I assure you, will happen to each one of you. So to parents, I say, please be patient. The best of things come out of those who are incapable of compromise. It takes time for an individual to create a new world of possibilities, to imagine and bring into being that which has never before existed, the wonder of a full and realized life. And to the graduates, please give as much thought to the person you will become as to the vocation you will pursue. Money, in the end, counts for very little, but acts of compassion and loving kindness resonate through eternity. When I was very young, living alone in the mountains of Colombia, a Kamsa Indian told me something I've never forgotten. In the first years of your life, Pedro said, you live beneath the shadow of the past, too young to know what to do. In your last years, you find that you are too old to understand the world coming at you from behind. In between, there is a small and narrow beam of light that illuminates your life. If you can look back on a long life and see that you have owned your choices, then there is little ground for resentment. Bitterness comes to those who look back with regret on the choices imposed upon them. The greatest creative challenge is a struggle to be the architect of your own life. So be patient. Do not, indeed never compromise, and give your destiny time to find you. Congratulations, and thank you very, very much.